Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Swanberg, the founder of Canadian Fertility Consultants and Egg Helpers. And tonight I'm so excited to unravel the landscape in Quebec as new legislation has had many changes occurring. And I hope that during this webinar, you will be inspired by Deborah Shapiro, lawyer, I don't know what we call you in Quebec, lawyer, as well as Doreen Brown, who will be joining us to share all of the insights and information that you need to know as you move forward as intended parents accessing surrogacy in Quebec. Next
Okay.
slide.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
So during this webinar, I will be going through these slides. I will be taking questions in the comment section. So if you have questions, please pop them there and we're happy to answer them. I've also had some questions coming in through Instagram today, and I will be addressing those as well. So let's get started. So I'm going to go through what we understand the process to be, and I would love to be corrected by both of you. So surrogacy in Quebec within the province, so Quebec intended parents engaging with a surrogate in Quebec, register to meet Quebec surrogacy requirements as intended parents, match with a surrogate who meets the mandatory eligibility criteria, complete screening process, draft and sign agreement with a notary, which I disagree with, begin the surrogacy journey. So,
But Leah, if I could interrupt, other than Quebec, people outside of Quebec do not know what a notary is.
Correct. And so I want to talk a little bit about this within Quebec process. And so when it says that intended parents need to meet the Quebec surrogacy requirements, can you guys talk about what that means, if that's a legal requirement, a social requirement?
Deborah, you could answer that.
Well, can we do a little bit of an intro first?
Absolutely. I would love that.
I feel that everything is going to make sense because if we kind of stick to a little bit of an order. So
Sure.
Thank you for allowing that. So before I begin our talk, I wanted to introduce Maitre Doreen Brown, you see on the bottom, and myself, and I'll start with her. As Maitre Brown's practically a legend in this field. She's been practicing the area of fertility law and creating surrogacy agreements since 1984. I'm assuming well
83.
before. Oh, 83. Sorry. Well before many of you, if not most of you, were born. She's been involved in this area, an area where no one wanted to touch, and help make many people's dreams come true. She's worked with intended parents from Quebec and abroad, and she's worked with surrogates too. So through Maitre Brown, I became involved in surrogacy and fertility law, and I've been doing this for about 15 years, and I've been working closely since the law changed in 2023. Like Maitre Brown, we also do family law, divorce, and I do mediation, and we do other areas as well. But this is our baby, Doreen's baby, and now my baby as well. We take a big pleasure in being involved, and we love our collaboration with CFC and Leah and everyone there. So prior to June 2023, there was never an issue with the legality of the surrogacy process or the agreements, but the agreements were considered null. Therefore, if there was a problem to arise and between the parties, and if the surrogate or the intended parents want to go to court and try and show the contract, the agreement as proof, the court would likely not recognize it. And I say likely because actually we never had to experience that. It's from our experience, and our experience, especially Doreen's, has been vast. It has never been tested. So once the baby was born and the intended parent that was not mentioned on the birth certificate, that non-mentioned parent would have to adopt the baby. And this is the way filiation or parentage was established back then, prior to June 2023. And it started with an application for an order of placement, and then the second stage, a petition for the adoption. And almost all these cases were accepted, and the exceptions went to court. And in our noteworthy cases, Mitch Brown's, she went to appeal and won. And this was very helpful for surrogacy in Quebec. Anyways, now let's get into the law and the new legislation. On June 6, 2023, Quebec adopted this new legislation, Bill 12, and it was called an act to reform family law with regard to filiation and to protect children born as a result of sexual assault and the victims of that assault, as well as the rights of surrogates of children, surrogates and of children born of a surrogacy project. So there were various components to this law. You hear different items about victims of sexual assault, but I'm going to talk about the part about surrogacy. So the new law was meant to protect the surrogate and the unborn child, and to avoid exploitation of the surrogate and commercialization of the child. Basically, to ensure that there was no payment for a child, but certain reimbursements were allowed. And by complying with surrogacy laws and procedures, intended parents could legally be recognized as the parents of the child. And I think that the purpose of the law was also to acknowledge that surrogacy was actually happening in Quebec, because it certainly was. So there are two different processes that Quebec intended parents follow for a surrogacy journey. They may opt to work with a surrogate who resides in Quebec, or they may choose to go with a surrogate who's living in one of the 7 authorized provinces, being Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. The rules for both of these projects came into effect in stages, but for the Quebec projects, which we're primarily talking about today, these came into effect in March 2024. And then when we were dealing with surrogates from other provinces, that came into effect in June 2024, a few months later. But before going through both of these options, the one dealing with Quebec surrogates or the ones dealing with surrogates from the 7 authorized provinces, it's important to understand the conditions, the general conditions for surrogacy. And the first condition is that the surrogate and the intended parents have to be living for 1 year in Quebec prior to the agreement. Before this, just on a side note, there were many IPs, intended parents, I'll call you IPs, that would be coming from different provinces and international too, to conclude surrogacy agreements with our surrogates from Quebec. So the doors are a bit closed to that, but that doesn't mean that international IPs don't consult with us. And Quebec, Quebec IPs also sometimes consult with us about dealing with a surrogate that's not in Quebec and that's not in the 7 authorized provinces, but we'll discuss that further on. Luckily, we have a very large and wonderful population of intended parents in Quebec. So we have a lot of great people to work with, and we've been doing a ton of agreements. The second condition is a surrogate must be 21 years of age. And interestingly enough, although almost all the surrogates we've dealt with have had a child, it's not a rule per se. So Doreen and I, Maitre Brown and I, am very informal. So if I say Doreen, you'll excuse me, Doreen. But we think it's best that a surrogate actually have the experience of at least being pregnant and hopefully having a child. But honestly, it is not a rule. So recently there's a situation we're in, and it's going to be the surrogate's first pregnancy, and everybody feels that this is fine and they're going to go ahead. And a third condition is that the combination of the genetic material must be in accordance with the law. So there can't be a genetic connection between the surrogate and the child. So these are some restrictions to avoid close family genetic combinations. So like if the intended father is providing, one of the intended fathers is providing the sperm, his sister would not be used as an egg donor because that would create too closely linked genetic combination. Now, a fourth condition, and on this I'm going to spend a little bit more time, there shall be no payment in this parental project. Paying for surrogacy is illegal, not only in Quebec, in Canada in general. Remuneration or payment in any form for the surrogate is strictly prohibited, but certain, and in fact, many expenses are allowed and totally reimbursable. So that would include, I'm just going to name a few, and they're not limited to these, but consulting with a doctor or a midwife. Usually there's no cost for a doctor, but there could be a cost, and that would be reimbursable cost. Medication with or without prescriptions, that could be natural health products, medical instruments like a breast pump, the cost of a private room, and other, we call them obligatory costs. Then there are also optional costs, and this is a more extensive amount, often ideally prescribed by a physician or a professional member of an order. It could be a midwife that's allowed to follow pregnancies. And this may include housekeeping, massage, physiotherapy, products prescribed by midwives, consulting a therapist. Sometimes there's the need during this journey. Prenatal courses, maternity clothing, groceries, telecommunications, travel costs relating to the pregnancy, cost to take care of somebody's child, somebody's animal, maybe to walk somebody's animal, different type of insurance, costs relating to using one's vehicle, and last and very important is compensation for lost income. But the two items that have become a big deal as of late, the two expenses are groceries and telecommunications, meaning internet. Quebec's a little bit tougher, more stringent, and maybe a little less generous than some other provinces in reimbursing these amounts. The law is actually clear, though, and stated in the Assisted Human Reproduction Act regulations, and there's a guidelines from Canada on the interpretation of those federal guidelines, and there's also Quebec's regulation on surrogacy. Really, you're not allowed to be reimbursing a surrogate's entire grocery bill or her entire internet bill. It's just a proportion that's linked to the pregnancy. And truthfully, I don't know what to say what goes on in the rest of Canada, because we keep hearing, the surrogate hears that somebody else can be reimbursed in full. And we can only draw our own conclusion that maybe the law is more loosely applied there. But in Quebec, we follow things. We follow things in a different way because it's a different situation here. But the truth is, both the regulations and these guidelines are saying you're not supposed to reimbursing these amounts in full, and it's significant. These topics keep coming up. So the surrogate should not be asking to have her entire family's grocery bill reimbursed. She could have it reimbursed for extra food related to the pregnancy. This could be extra meat or chicken, or maybe the intended parents want their surrogate to eat organic. And so while there's no law per se that the IPs should reimburse a certain amount, we've started to establish, and we do this a lot, so we've helped establish a 30% amount of a grocery bill. It's become a common practice. And while we do a lot of these proportion-based reimbursements, like 30%, there is also the option, and if it's more favorable, somebody could take their grocery bill and they could highlight all these extra costs, the extra organic, the extra protein, the extra whatever it is. And if it's better, because we're always trying to be as generous to the surrogates as possible. And it's sometimes difficult for Maitre Brown and myself, because we're like the messenger of this more difficult news when we hear that, sometimes it's easier, more amounts are reimbursed in other areas other than Quebec. Anyways, the law also does not foresee the reimbursement of restaurant bills. But if a surrogate is very tired during her pregnancy, we've included sometimes a few, restaurant bills or takeout food, and we feel that this is okay. but in our early cases, we were having surrogates reimburse a ton of restaurant bills, and it raised some eyebrows. So a few, maybe that's okay, but like not like tons and tons of restaurant bills. Now, if there was somehow maybe the woman was on bed rest, the surrogate, and there was a note by a medical doctor, it makes the argument even better. So in Quebec, with Quebec projects, which we're going to discuss further, it's notaries who are supervising the reimbursements, and they're not going to just okay every item. And then for the so that's like the Quebec files, but then in the files with the out of Quebec surrogates, we have a department, a new government department of Gestation pour autrui au Québec that will be reviewing the expenses, and we're going to discuss that a little bit further on. And just as the groceries, the same goes for telecommunications. The internet bill, you're allowed to submit a portion of the bill. Maybe the surrogate needs extra data or a better plan because of the pregnancy. She wants to be closely linked with the intended parents. Maybe there's more FaceTime or whatever it is. Maybe the intended parents can't always accompany her to the visits, the medical visits, so they want to, join on FaceTime. So we've kind of decided an acceptable amount is like 15 to 25% of an internet bill. So I can't really emphasize enough how these projects are supposed to be altruistic. And again, not only for Quebec, it's the rule in Canada. No one is supposed to be paying surrogates. But as I said, maybe the law is applied a little bit more loosely in the other provinces. And another mention is sometimes a reimbursement for an expense can appear as a disguised payment. So that was what I wanted to say about that. And now I'm going to go to the last condition, that the surrogacy has to, the surrogacy agreement must come before the pregnancy of the surrogate. So in practice, Quebec fertility clinics actually want a signed surrogacy agreement completed before creating embryos, which, if you get Doreen Maitre Brown talking about this, we all scratch our heads. It's a little bit exigeant. We're talking about, again, this is projects with Quebec surrogates and clinics in Quebec. And the clinics in Quebec are wonderful. They just have no choice but to apply the law. This means the intended parents need to be matched with a surrogate, and there must be a surrogacy contract signed before a notary, before the surrogate is even screened. And only afterward there can be the creation of embryos and embryo transfers. But there are some exceptions. First of all, it's not going to apply if there's a clinic outside of Quebec. They're going to give you the okay you just have to have the agreement before the transfer, but not before an embryo, creation of embryos. And also sometimes parties.
Deborah, can I interrupt you for a second? They don't create the embryos. They will not get the eggs to create the embryos until you have a signed agreement with the surrogate.
Yes.
So the clinics are very frustrating.
Yes, it's a little bit of a circular problem because, Matt Brown, why don't you discuss a little bit about how that could just be very difficult? The fact
it's difficult because you're signing an agreement, your clients are paying for an agreement, then they go to the clinic and the surrogate does not pass the screening, so you're back to step 0. You have no eggs, you have no embryos, you have no surrogate. So you're back at 0. It's very frustrating and becomes almost prohibitive.
Fortunately, we don't hear so many stories like that, but we always like to look at all the possibilities. We're a little bit of realistic pessimists at times, that it's very important to just be mindful of that possibility.
And Deborah, where it says, you talked about signing the agreement, we see this information about signing an agreement with a notary. And for us at CFC, it's so important that the intended parents have a lawyer, the surrogate has a lawyer, that everyone has had, fair legal representation. And I want to know what you guys are doing about that, like how people in practical terms are still having independent legal advice, then having a notary, or if they have independent legal advice, do they need to have a notary?
So I was just getting to that. Excellent question. So in Quebec, as we know, the agreements are going to be drafted by a notary if the surrogate's in Quebec. So we, I'm talking now for Maitre Brown and myself, we meet with many clients for these type of projects because we are lucky to be known and experienced in this area. So clinics and agencies have confidence in and refer these files to us, and because they believe that the intended parent should consult an experienced fertility lawyer like Maitre Brown or myself. But technically, somebody could go straight to a notary, and there's nothing stopping that. It's and for us, we just always are reevaluating the way we do our projects, because we do feel we offer something really important. We go over everything and just make sure everything is understood. But I will tell you that there's always the option, and it's usually in the notarial agreement, that the surrogate, there's always money put aside in that agreement for the surrogate to have a legal opinion, her own. So in the files that we're involved with, we do start a lot of these files and then refer them to the notary. So we do go over everything with the intended parents. And then we often, I have a meeting with the intended parents and the surrogate, and we just want to make sure everything is understood and the expenses, so that by the time they go to the notary, they have a good understanding. They started to think about expenses, and that's the way we do it. But it's recommended, but is it obligatory? No, it's not obligatory. It's recommended, but to each his own.
I just think that if we're looking at what is, they're talking about exploitation, and, the way this legislation in Quebec is written, that no exploitation of a woman, yet you can share the same lawyer as the intended parents. And, for me, it doesn't align, because I think in front of intended parents or using their lawyer, I don't see how that is protecting the surrogate. And I know you guys are great, because we've had many surrogates who have worked with you guys, and our strong belief is that, the surrogate has all of the information, provided to her, not only in this, surrogacy requirement and this social worker requirement and, all of these other requirements, but I think legally there's something so important. This project, as you said, it is so important, and ensuring that the surrogate understands all of her obligations, as well as intended parents understanding, what they're engaging in, separate and apart from each other.
No, I would agree with you, Leah. And the IPs and the surrogate have to attend an information session with a professional. These are for Quebec projects. Both the IPs and the surrogate, in 2 different sessions, will have to follow a 3-hour court little session and get an attestation of attendance. And then, at a point, as I said, the IPs will begin with the notary. If the file started with us, we will refer to a notary. The agreement can be drawn up in French. Obviously, most of them are, but there's a minority of English-speaking parents too, and there can be an English copy to the agreement. With a notary, you have to deposit the full amount of the projected expense budget, and that could be high when you actually look at everything. That could be a little bit before, a little during the pregnancy, and then even a little bit post. It could be $50,000-$60,000. And this has to go into the notary's trust account. It's the notary who's going to reimburse the surrogate, because we start at a baseline idea. And with our projects out of Quebec, we talk about 25 or $30,000. But then when we add in extra expenses like that are beyond what will our cumulative maximum, it does bring the price higher even in those projects as well. Okay, so just going back, so the notary gets the money, she reimburses, he or she or they reimburse the surrogate, and after the baby's born, a consent is signed between the 7th and the 30th day. In Quebec, they who deliver is considered the mother. So actually on the consent, they actually have to say the surrogate is saying they're the mother. We don't love that, but they actually have to. It's been legislated. It has to be on the surrogate's consent.
Deborah, I just wanted to point out to everybody, before the law came into effect, from 2016 until this law came into effect, we never declared the mother. And we always said mother not declared. She was not part of the adoption proceeding, nothing. And now in 2023 comes along, and mère porteuse, I don't even use the word mère porteuse, surrogate mother. I use the word femme porteuse. The Attorney General laughs at me when I use that term. But I learned that when I was in France once. It was a program on surrogacy, and they use that because carrying a child does not make you a mother. And I find that has really brought us backwards and not forward.
And that doesn't mean that we don't recognize that the surrogate, and I say this often, they're the angels that walk the earth. You cannot describe what these surrogates do, but that doesn't, to us, it doesn't make them a mother. It's the intended parents that are to be the parents of the child. Anyways, that whole thing does get altered in the Quebec surrogacy process, and eventually the intended parents, their affiliation is established, and there's no need to go to court. So a bunch of documents will get sent to État Civil, and that will complete that project.
And Deborah, is that you and Doreen that prepare those documents post birth for intended parents?
I do that. I do that if parents want me involved. I'm involved. I'm actually really involved. But there may be notary. I imagine there's notaries also that do that as well. And in the beginning, we were scratching our heads. How are notaries going to do this? But I'm sure a lot of them do a great job. And I deal with notaries all the time. It's just it's a little bit different, and we're all adapting to a new process.
Notaries are allowed to go to court if it's a non-contentious matter. They cannot go to court if there's any kind of contestation, could be it by the Attorney General or anybody else.
Okay. We have a question, Deborah, in our comments. This person is saying, I have dual citizenship and this process is legal in my European home country. Could I do it there and bring the baby to Quebec without issues? The sperm would be mine, so the baby would have my DNA. It would also be 100% altruistic process since my colleague who lives in Europe wants to help us.
Okay, well, I could tell you that. The baby will be Canadian, can become Canadian. If you are Canadian, not a problem. You will be allowed to come into Canada. You will get a Medicare card for the child. You could go to daycare. You are not going to get your parental leave. And this is a horrible thing. I am in court now, but before a court recognizing the affiliation where somebody has not complied with the law, their child is registered, they'll be registered at daycare, has a Medicare card, but they are not getting the parental leave. I think I could be wrong, but I believe I can force that issue because these are people that have been paying into this fund through
QPIP,
many years.
Or RQAP.
Yeah, it's QPIP, the Quebec pension plan, but it's the intended parents are very angry because some of them just don't have a lot of money. And it comes out to almost a year of salary between the two of them. So it's a lot of money, and I'm ready to go to court, but I have to find someone who wants to pay to have this challenged. Because I did win a case in 2015 where the clients who obtained a judgment from Massachusetts before the child was born, a judgment stating that they would be the parents, they are the parents of this unborn child. And when I asked our court to recognize that judgment because they weren't getting their pension, the Attorney General contested it, but I won that case too. So there were two very good, cases that I won dealing with surrogacy in the Court of Appeal.
So that question also would go more with the second option of dealing with either a surrogate from one of the authorized provinces. Let's forget about Quebec surrogates for a minute, or beyond. And this is something that Maitre Brown is dealing with increasingly. People are coming to her and asking, can we deal with a surrogate from the States? Can we deal with a surrogate from Mexico? And what are the implications? And it's exactly as she said, we want people to comply with the law and make it easy for everybody, but there's a demand of there are clients that want to go beyond, and they want to know what's going to be the bottom line. And so we're in the process, we're in court with some of these files, and we're considering what we're the future of these type of files, because it's possible that somebody might just decide, maybe I'm not going to try and get the birth certificate recognized. I will have my birth certificate from abroad that lists me as a parent, and as Metro Brown said, I'll get Medicare. And I've been in touch with the school boards. I really, really want to know if there's any deterrent at all. If somebody comes in, they don't have that birth certificate recognized because they didn't comply with Quebec's rules, could there be an implication, a consequence? And supposedly, no. So it's really, as Metro Brown was saying, it's the QPIP. That's where they get us at this point. And it's something that we're exploring, contestations, and some clients are voicing an interest to do that.
Well, if you moved, Deborah,
what's that?
If you moved, you lived in Quebec and you moved to Mexico for 2 years, and that's where you started your family, and you came home, I mean, your baby would be born in Mexico.
But it's not. But if it's a surrogate, they treat it differently.
Yeah.
Okay. You see, our code is clear. You can't punish a child for something the parents did or did not do. Okay, that's how I won my case in the Court of Appeal when the adoption was refused by a judge back in 2014. And I said, you're punishing this child because her brother has the mother as on the birth certificate, and this little kid has the surrogate as the mother. And I won that case because it's in the best interest of the child, and they were punishing the child for something the parents supposedly did. You can't do that. So that's one of my, I think, a very strong argument. That article of the code, 522, the civil code, says the same thing. Every child has the same rights and the same obligations, notwithstanding the circumstances of his birth. You can't treat, that's why they're not punishing the child. You're getting the birth certificate, you're getting a Medicare card, but daddy or mom, dad, you're not getting your parental leave. I'm allowed to punish you.
Yeah.
But by not giving the parents the money, they're making the child suffer. That's an argument that I have.
Well, let's move on to the happier outside of Quebec journeys, because they are
very easier.
Much easier. And I'll start before you start, Deborah, to just say that at CFC, we have worked with Quebec arrangements. We have also worked with many intended parents in Quebec who are working with surrogates outside of Quebec. And we have completed those journeys all the way through until the intended parents were parents and recognized through their presentation of the surrogates' receipts to the Quebec government. And we are really proud of that at CFC because initially, in those first few, as Deborah knows, we were back and forth to make sure we got it right. But Deborah, if you want to talk a little bit about how you can support surrogacy outside of Quebec with intended parents inside of Quebec.
Yes, I think it's good because you may have, your participants may be exploring both options as Quebec IPs. Option one, dealing with a Quebec surrogate, or sometimes it's wherever we can find a surrogate, right? So there's projects with surrogates from the authorized province. So the government, as I said, has created, it's the Ministry of Health and Social Services that created a department for the surrogacies outside Quebec called Direction de la grossesse pour autrui au Québec. And as long as the Quebec intended parents follow the process and respect the conditions, it's actually, we were expecting this to be so bad, and it's working out great. And the first step is to open up, I'm going to go through it quickly, to open up a government portal. There'll be some type of criminal check. And there's still that 3-hour information session, but just for the IPs, not the surrogate. And the IPs will get the first, so that this is the first of 3 type of approvals that they get from this government.
Deborah, sorry, do they not have to open up each a portal? It's not one portal for the 2 of them. It's a portal for each parent.
Oh, that may be so. Thank you.
It is.
Correction.
I've had clients that this happened. They said, "Oh, we each have to have our own."
Okay, good point. Thank you. Then there's the creation of the surrogacy agreement. So the IPs and the surrogate each have their own lawyers. This is more, listen, it's in our comfort zone because it's the way it used to. It's much more similar to the way it used to be. But that doesn't mean it's the only way. But this is the benefits of this. Is that it's just more clear cut. We each have a lawyer, and we as the IP lawyers, we're often the IP lawyers almost always. We go back and forth, and then eventually, and we work pretty quick. We got clients that are always rushing us, and we're pretty fast. Then finally, they submit the agreement onto the government portal, and it has to be translated into English also because they're obviously dealing with a English surrogate, so the government wants to know that the surrogate also saw something in English. They wait for the second approval, this second approval, so the second of the 3 approvals. Once approved, the transfer of the embryos can begin, and the creation will likely have been done beforehand because we don't have that same problem as with the Quebec clinics. So once the surrogate is pregnant, and this is always such happy news, and we're so happy when our clients, share things with us because we also need to know it, but it's just, most of the time the surrogate gets pregnant, but I can't say it's all the time. And we're always just grateful about this. And the IPs are going to start keeping track of reimbursements, and the agencies do a great job. And have learned just exactly what Leah, you took the words out of my mouth. They have learned along with us, and it was not easy for anyone. And we were a little tough at times, and they were a little bit annoyed, but we have such good dialogue with CFC, and there's other agency as well, but we work a lot with CFC, and I have to give a ton of credit to them because it was not easy. And the first few, I'm repeating what you said, Leah, because it's just, I remember it as if it was yesterday. The first files were rough, but we got into a rhythm, and things are going well now. And they were always, they were little challenges that we were always able to meet. So the baby's born, and the surrogate will sign a consent both in French and English, releasing the baby to the intended parents, recognizing filiation, renouncing any rights that she may have, and the birth will be registered in that province, and a foreign birth certificate, let's just say from Ontario, will be issued. And the IPs will have to go to court to have the foreign birth certificate recognized. Sounds worse than it is. It's not a long or costly process. And it's the Tribunal Unifié de la Famille de la Cour de Québec in Montreal. It's at 410 Bellechasse. We go in. I just went in was it this week? Was May 5th this? No, it was last week. Sorry. It was like literally 20 minutes. And we're asking the court to order that État Civil issue a document from Quebec, like a Quebec birth certificate that names the IPs, but it's basically a repeat of the foreign birth certificate, but it will be issued from Quebec. And that is,
Deborah, I think that's one issue I have with the law.
yeah,
Why a birth certificate, a new article of the code 522.1 says the filiation of a child is proved by his act of birth, notwithstanding the circumstances in which it was formed, something to that effect. Why do we even have to do that? I'm going to go further. I have a problem that they should have a Quebec birth certificate, because when you come with your birth certificate for wherever the child is born, you give it to our director of civil status, you are never seeing that birth certificate again. Now I have this nightmare that one day the parents will go and apply for a Canadian passport, and the person there will say, oh, this child was born in Mexico, it was born in the United States, it was born in it. Why do you have a Quebec birth certificate? Where's the original? So I always tell my clients, order more than one original, because once you give it to the director of civil status, you're not seeing that document again. It's gone.
and it may sound like, why is this an issue? But actually in Ontario, which is, we deal mostly with Ontario, they give us such a hard time to emit more, to issue more than one birth certificate, but we're getting better on that, and more than one, because as Metro Brown is saying, the État Civil is going to keep one. So now we're getting to the third and last authorization from the government, and that is the attestation of complicity. That is after you submitted your expenses and they've gone through them, and they're, in the beginning it was taking longer and maybe they were a little tougher, but they're actually quite decent. And there are sometimes a few restaurants, they don't like manicures. Pedicure is a different thing, because maybe a person wants to take care of their feet and they can't reach down, or it's hard. But a manicure is not considered. You see all these beautiful young ladies now with their nails, so manicures seem to be a big deal to somebody, not to me, as you can see. But so that's maybe not a reimbursable expense. But the bottom line is the government's not given such a hard time. I find them very pleasant to work with. I deal with them regularly, and things are just going better now. So the department will issue a letter advising the IPs to go to the court as soon as possible. I have many IPs that are so nervous. We got to go like yesterday, and it's not like such a rush, but of course we go quick. And we go quick because then we got the QPIP threatening to stop their, we have so many issues with the QPIP, just giving people a hard time, but we deal with it and it gets resolved. We're talking about when parents have followed the law. When they've gone to Mexico and not followed the law, that's a whole other story that Major Brown was discussing. Anyways, with this last authorization, the law and the law of the respective province, it could be Ontario, Alberta, whatever, and the consent of the surrogate, we go to court to ask that this foreign birth certificate be recognized, and the application's it has to be notified to the department, to État Civil, and to the Attorney General, to give any of these entities a chance to contest. And if a rule wasn't followed, or we didn't get an attestation, they will be contesting.
I am in that file right now with a child born out of the country, and the the Attorney General is contesting our request. It is proceeding. We have several clients who have had babies born or ready to be born in Mexico or other countries. I have the United States too. And the United States is really particular, because they talk about payment and compensation, and they talk about humongous amounts. And if I deal with the attorneys at the beginning, the wording is changed, amounts could be changed. And, it's more of a reimbursement, I think, because they know we cannot pay a surrogate. In any case, I will know more probably by, I would say, September or October, by the time this case gets to be heard. But that would only be for the recognition of the filiation and not dealing with the payment, the parental leave. So that's in another court, but it'll happen. I'm confident.
So we just discussed something where I've gone through the conditions, I've gone through the steps with that Department of Grossesse pour autrui, au Quebec. Then there's a situation where somebody did still deal with that department, but they didn't fulfill a condition. Maybe somebody went ahead and started a transfer before they had that letter of approval from the government. So that's not like such a serious issue. We go to court, we don't have that attestation because they won't give it to us because we didn't follow a condition. And the court has a certain discretion with Article 541.36, and they could decide in our favor, and it's already happened. But there's a situation where somebody well-intentioned dealt with one of the provinces but didn't follow all the conditions. If there was good intent and there was, nothing crazy, we feel that we'll generally have success in those cases when we go to court because of that discretion. But then there's a situation, again, we come back to if Quebec parents want to work out of one of those provinces and want to go beyond Canada, and it's interesting, even New Brunswick, it's not authorized. So you could say New Brunswick, United States, Mexico. What will happen? We're in the midst of trying to figure that out. Yeah. So that was my little overview of Quebec and the conditions and both options. And if there was any question, Leah.
Yes. Aaliyah, do you want to go to next slide? I think we may have covered next slide, but if we can go to next slide. So just talking about, as I said, our services, we work with intended parents in Quebec journeys and outside of Quebec journeys. We do highly recommend, regardless of where you are engaging, that you have a lawyer and that your surrogate, if even she is in Quebec where it's not required, that we can do better than what's just required. We know that surrogacy is such a huge project, and we want to ensure that everyone has all of the information going into the journey. And so we are so grateful to work with Doreen and Deborah on this. So thank you guys. Aaliyah, next slide. I think that's it for slides, but okay. We talked about legal implementation, so that's great. I do have some questions though that came in through Instagram. And the first question is, with the Quebec journey, is the surrogate's husband assumed the father like it is outside of?
No, he's not even part of the agreement.
Really?
Actually, yes, but for both type of agreements, with a Quebec surrogate or an out of Quebec surrogate, in the past we always had the surrogate spouse on the agreements before the law changed. And it's a great question because we don't understand why they're not on it. It's all the more important for protections to ensure that the surrogates, if the surrogate has a husband, and
that he agrees to this.
Yeah, and also just that he undertakes not to engage in careless
with other people, and that he understands the responsibility, and that even though where he lives he is assumed the father as he would be in Ontario, that based on Quebec law and where the parents live, which seems crazy, he's not assumed the father.
Right.
But yet the surrogate who has no genetic link is the mother.
Is assumed the mother.
So.
Well,
I have no words on that one.
No, I think it's ridiculous, but
here we are.
It's working, much to their chagrin. We're doing quite well with it.
Not all bad. The idea behind it of not wanting to exploit and wanting to protect the surrogate and the unborn child, no commercialization. Those are good, good incentives.
I
But
agree.
I think they forget to think about the intended parents. So the surrogate, of course, has to be protected, but the intended parents have rights too. In these
Absolutely.
projects, I mean, they're very geared towards the surrogate. That's why, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. The next question was, this comes from an intended mother, and she says, with this change in Quebec, do I have to list that I used an egg donor in my legal contract?
Say that again. Sorry.
The question comes from an
You'll
intended.
need to unlock your iPhone first.
Sorry, my phone. The question is from an intended mother, and she says, do I need to add that I have an egg donor on my legal agreement with the surrogate now?
That you had.
That she had an egg donor. So
It's not part of the contract. It's not. I don't think it's part of the contract with the surrogate.
okay.
Not that from what I remember, Deborah. What do you think?
I think so. No, I mean, no, but we do talk about the the sperm donation and the egg donation, and sometimes it's anonymous or
No, but she's asking the contract between the intended parents and the surrogate.
does it have to list that they used an egg
You don't
donor?
have to list that there's been we got the eggs from someone else.
Okay.
well, if somebody wants to write us back, let me just confirm that, because
Okay.
I prefer to just.
Contracts are so long that you know what, it's something. But we have an egg donor, an anonymous egg donor agreement,
Right.
Yeah.
and it's you're making embryos. It's not like when I was first doing surrogacy in the 80s, it was straight insemination. So the surrogate was the genetic mother.
I actually think that
Father was
can be
confirmed.
vague, and I'm pretty, yeah. I think that it's not an issue. I don't think it actually has to be mentioned like that.
And then the next question from someone is from a same-sex male couple in Quebec that want to do a traditional surrogacy in Quebec. So direct insemination, Noreen, is that possible under this new legislation?
Deb, I think it is possible.
I think it is.
It is possible.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's advisable. I did do one. I did have a file like that right at the beginning after the law came into effect. And I have to tell you that at that time I was explaining the laws to the judges and I was writing the judgment. So,
there's nothing like stopping it, but it's not necessarily something that we have many cases like that. That's for sure.
Okay. And then my last question was,
it's an artisanal insemination, and that is not prohibited.
It's not prohibited.
It's rare, but it's not prohibited.
Exactly.
the next question, or the last question from intended parents, is if we are intended parents in Quebec and wanting to get started, do we start with the government assessment? Do we start with a lawyer, a notary, the clinic? What is the first step?
Well, first to figure, to be matched with a surrogate, because that's going to, it's going to depend on where the surrogate is. Is the surrogate in Quebec or is the surrogate from Ontario? Because that's going to set the stage of how to proceed. If you're dealing with a Quebec surrogate and you're dealing with a Quebec clinic, that's a completely different story than if you're dealing with somebody from Ontario and create. Are there embryos, or are you going to be creating the embryos? Do you have to
different
start?
Questions, very different questions. But you're asking two lawyers, should they deal with lawyers? 100%. In my opinion, they should find out information about the law. and they should. And I do have to say that the clinics very often tell their clients they should consult a lawyer, and I've been given, I have clients who were told by the clinic to call me.
Okay, excellent. And the last question that's in the chat, and Sebastian, we're going to put in the chat the contact details for Deborah and Doreen so you can reach out to them. But he asks, what are the legal consequences of doing this outside of Canada? Is it jail time, a fine, or just losing the parental leave? Quebec's website is vague, and I would like to know how serious it could be.
You know what you're asking?
Good question.
We're just starting.
This is what
I told you. I have a file now pending where the child was born outside of Canada, and there's no country that's been approved. I think the filiation itself will be approved. I don't know about the parental leave because, again, this is Quebec. So we're at one level court for the recognition of the filiation, but for the ordering of the parental leave, that's going to have to go to Superior Court. Or to say that you are infringing on my charter right, you are discriminating against me. That goes to Superior Court.
And if you're dealing with another country, you have to think about obtaining citizenship for the child. So you want to get a proof of citizenship for that child. So otherwise, that's an extra.
Deborah does that. Deborah does the citizenship work.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you. And we've put, for those of you watching, we've put Deborah's email address in the chat, as well as a link to their website. So please, if you're watching this webinar, please reach out directly. I agree with you guys, especially in places like Quebec. The lawyer really needs to be the first stop, so you can, get information before you go too far down the track and are in a situation that is tough. So thank you, ladies, both. It's always great to see you.
I'm looking at the comments, and I see Sebastian, and I know. You know what? Just call us or email us. I think you have you have Deborah's email. I think you should put mine on there too.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Doreen's dealing with a lot of these out of Canada or cases.
So work as a team, and that's it.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for having us, Leah and Aaliyah.
Thank you to everyone that joined us tonight. And stay tuned. We'll send that out and an email with further information if you haven't caught the emails here in the comments. And as I always say with legal webinars, this information is as of Wednesday, May 13th, 2026. And as we all know, laws change. So please consult a lawyer if you're watching this as of May 14th, 2026. And the lawyers to consult are these two. So thank you, everyone.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.